If I could have your attention, please. Maybe get some light. Let's turn the lights down a little bit. All right, we'll call the second day of the Legislative Conference to order. First, let me ask if you would all join me in rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A couple of really quick items. One, if you could silence your cell phones, that would be appreciated. Second, this event is being broadcast on Wisconsin Eye, so we want to be on our best behavior. Third, yesterday, one name was mentioned more than any other, and Chairman of the Board, Lance Plimmel, said, make sure you make this person rise so they can be recognized. Our very own artificial intelligence expert and county leader, Troy Streckenbach from Brown County, the Brown County Executive. Troy, where are you? Stand up and be recognized, sir. Yeah, you were mentioned a lot yesterday as our artificial intelligence leader, and regular intelligence too, to be clear. Okay, we have had this event many times in the past. It is our Wisconsin County Government living room, and we are so excited again to have leadership of our Wisconsin legislature here with us today. We have, of course, Speaker of the Assembly, Robin Vos. We have Majority Leader of the Senate, Scott Fitzgerald. We have Minority Leader of the Senate, Jennifer Schilling, and Minority Leader of the Assembly, Gordon Hintz. Please join me in giving them a very warm Wisconsin County's welcome.
Now, I understand Governor Evers got a standing ovation. Where's ours? Wow. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, welcome. We're in the graces of leadership here. Everyone was able to make it. Everyone got in okay with the icy, crusty roads?
It's appropriate that I see a vendor out there has ice scrapers for all, so we better all
nice?
grab one of those.
It's good.
Yes, yeah.
Well, let's get right into it. We want to talk about, well, I guess the challenges of the day. So maybe we'll start with what's the agenda for the four caucuses? And there's no particular order, but what's on the docket? What do you want to accomplish this next session?
I'll go first. This is a new dynamic that we find ourselves in as Democrats, having a Democratic governor and administration. I've said that we find ourselves in an arranged marriage, which I respect the voters have decided a Democratic governor and administration, but they've also voted for a Republican legislature. So this arranged marriage, we would not even consider dating ourselves outside of that building, but we find ourselves forced to work together, that both parties need each other. Democrats need the Republicans who chair committees to schedule our bills and get them on the floor and support there. Republicans need Democratic support, so a Democratic governor is inclined to sign bipartisan bills. So we are finding this new landscape, wanting to echo and amplify and support a Democratic agenda. I think I've sat here before and I've talked about the importance of transportation and education and health care in this state, and those are kind of the three pillars that Governor Evers has talked about. I hope we can find some bipartisan and some trust and start off on things. Sometimes you tackle the smaller issues where you find agreement and you work towards those bigger ones. Obviously, the budget is really the first kind of the big thing out of the block right now, and I will say it is a tough place right now. I think lame duck session in December, and I don't want to relive history, did not help as we moved into January. There was not really a honeymoon period at all. But working with Governor Evers and his administration, the Senate is now meeting with his secretaries, and we need to confirm those secretaries. But I hope that we can, both parties are talking about wanting to support public education in schools. I think both parties realize that we need to deal with our infrastructure. I sat in on the task force on transportation in La Crosse earlier this week, and all the diverse stakeholders around the room talked about we do have a revenue problem that we need to figure out how we invest today and into tomorrow. Obviously here with an audience of Counties Association, I served on the county board in La Crosse when I was like 30 years ago. I was 20 years old, a student at UWL. I think, Speaker Voss, you've been on the county board. If you were? No. Okay, there are a couple of us that have some county board experience. Many of us that have served in the legislature do, in both the Senate and the Assembly. So the issues that you come forward and are talking about, it is, if we can find some juvenile justice reform, finding some common ground on that will help. I think the bigger issues as Democrats, we've talked about wanting to refinance student loan debt. We've wanted to talk about child care affordability. We're talking about a middle class tax cut. But for many of the issues that you are here talking to us about, and many groups are coming in and they give us a one-pager of their legislative priorities, the Counties Association comes in with a binder. They come in with a binder and they're like, we know we only have 30 minutes, but these are our 4 top. And they're talking about Lincoln Hills, they're talking about transportation, they're talking about child protective services. Those are the things, and I know they're going to be back, but they have this binder. And so I hope that we can find some common ground because our county boards are, technically nonpartisan. We realize there are politics everywhere, but if we can be a better partner with you and we can talk about local control. I know the governor was here talking about his priorities yesterday, but I want the legislature to be a better partner with our local units of government moving forward.
Priorities for the other caucuses? What do you wish to accomplish this next session?
I think for us, and this is what I've been telling the members, is it's a huge adjustment to come out with the elections the way they did turn out in November, because for 8 years now, there are a number of senators that have been used to, coming up with an idea on Monday, by Wednesday it's drafted, by Friday it's in the standing committee and making its way through the process, and before you know it, it's on the floor of the Senate. So tempo, I think, is what I keep stressing with our members, is to say, listen, I was here for 8 years under Governor Doyle, and we had some good successes, and we had some rough spots, but a lot of that had to do with expectations and timing, and so I think that's critical. And it's going to be difficult, I think, because Governor Evers, coming into this right now, just strictly my interpretation, is that there's a lot of young people that are trying to accomplish a lot in a short period of time. And, so when you make a call, and I've met with probably, 6 or 7 of the cabinet nominees so far, and you can tell, that they have experience maybe in that area, but, there's not a lot of give and take so far with the East Wing on creating a budget. So, from my perspective, it's going to be, again, trying to do that dance that gets us to a good place on a lot of different topics. So, but I would say the tempo is, my anticipation is it's going to slow down a lot, and that doesn't mean you don't accomplish a lot. It just means it's not going to probably be the whirlwind that we've seen in our Republican caucus before, and that, we've got to get used to that again. And I have 3 new senators, and, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is in my caucus because it's a wholesale change to some extent. And we just had our full day caucus last week up in the Dells, and it was interesting because it's the first time that all of these individuals had time to kind of mix it up a little bit, talk about issues, and there's kind of these little factions that have evolved, but that's my job as leader, to try and pull everybody together and get us marching in the same direction. And I think Senator Schilling and I have become we understand each other better and where we're headed, and I think that'll be helpful in this new environment as well. So,
I thought for a second you were going to say Senator Schilling and I have become really, really close friends.
I was close.
Okay, you're this close. Okay.
It's a different kind of friendship.
How about from the Assembly Democrats? What's the agenda?
I'll say this. It's interesting because we also have a lot of new members, and we have a lot of members. I think we only have 6 or 7 members that ever served before the last 8 years in the majority, but all 4 of us have served in divided government. Senator Schilling and I were in the Assembly when we had a Democratic governor, and we're in the minority. And so, there's some experience that you can look back on. What I'll say and reinforce both what the Senate leaders said is whenever we have a candidate running, I always say, you know, get out there and talk to people and go ask people what they're concerned about and what the issues are. In other words, a lot of people that want to run for office have it decided ahead of time, you know, I want to run on these issues, but sometimes those issues aren't maybe what is on the public's mind. And I think in terms of what has impacted or influenced what Governor Evers ran on and how he's going to govern, it is the real issues that are facing people in Wisconsin that they are most concerned about. And I think his agenda is reflective of the priorities that we hear about, that we see demonstrated in polls. And I think, you know, having someone that, Governor Walker was a very good politician, but also very ambitious, maybe, you know, running for president or some other things. I don't think anybody can accuse Tony Evers of thinking about the next election or running for president. And I think that is sort of refreshing and also allows him to sort of steer us. You know, I thought in his speech he laid out not only issues, but perhaps a path going forward for how the legislature could work together and follow if we're interested in funding schools, if we're interested in expanding health care and lowering costs, if we're interested in actually addressing our revenue challenge when it comes to infrastructure in the state. So, I mean, those are issues. They don't, you know, if we don't act, that's a decision in itself. We don't get it done. And so it's on us to try to find a way to get it done as leaders. A lot of this will be new in terms of how that happens. And you know, I've tried to talk to some of my colleagues to say, you know, you're not going to get it all. But we've got a role to play as minority Democrats for the first time in a while. There's a lot of things we're encouraged about. We were happy to see the governor come out yesterday in support of dark store reform. We know that the tax shift that's been occurring to small businesses and residential homeowners continues to expand and get bigger. I think that we've had bipartisan support, you know, in the legislature, and we would like to see that something that gets done. So I think his support behind it is going to make, hopefully, something like that get done earlier, but also for your communities. I'll remind folks, we're in the second longest economic expansion in U.S. history. And, you know, the last 8 years, we've had more revenue in each year, even though our growth has been modest compared to the national growth. But these should have been the good years, and yet we're spending less from a state standpoint on aids to counties and municipalities than we were 8 years ago. And so the question is, if we're not, you know, if we haven't invested during these good times, what happens when things, you know, dry up? And I know that you've been stretched pretty thin in terms of what the state has asked you to do. I'd like to see a budget that at least allows flexibility or funds things. So our relationship with the counties is really important. I hope that will also help shape the agenda. I know in my county, we have our entire legislative delegation attend the legislative affairs committees. It allows us to get input and respond. You know, and I think your continued input, hopefully, you know, on transportation, keep the pressure on for us to get something done.
The Assembly Republicans, what's the agenda for the caucus?
Well, first of all, happy Ronald Reagan Day. Today is February 6th. It's an official holiday in the state of Wisconsin. If any of you are interested, my office is providing cake this afternoon to celebrate.
Oh, great.
So, you know, one of my favorite things about Ronald Reagan is that he was a happy warrior. He was somebody who you could disagree with, but at the same time have a respectful disagreement, right? And it seems like far too often in politics today, it is entirely about my way or the highway. I see it on Facebook, I see it on social media, where people who have no idea what they're talking about assume that they know the intentions behind a bill or an idea or legislation. So let me start by saying the best way for us to actually move forward is to sit down and talk to each other. So right away, after the election, Assembly Republicans took the time to sit down amongst ourselves first and say, look, we know we now have a Democratic governor. Not one of us voted for him. But as Jen said, it's an arranged marriage. We don't have a choice. So we said, what are areas that we could actually focus on and find ways to work together? Now, realizing everybody in here understands politics better than the average person, there are certain things that Republicans are never going to support, no matter how much time and effort Democrats spend on talking about them. They are core principles that they are never going to violate. And I also know that there are things that Democrats believe in that are core principles that they are never going to violate. If the first ideas we put forward were ones that you knew were core Democratic principles that they were never going to agree with, would you say that was a good idea or a bad idea? It's a bad idea, right? So when the very first ideas that are being put out by the other side rely on massive tax increases, a big government takeover of our healthcare system, do you think that most Republicans look and say, wow, that's a great idea for us to begin that bipartisan conversation? No. So we sat down and said, let's ignore a lot of the hot button issues that we know would make Democrats fall off their end of the equation and look at things we could work together on. So we sent Governor Evers a letter, it's public, with 9 different ideas where we thought, I think here are ideas that Republicans have started to talk about to say here are things we know we can find bipartisan consensus on. Expanding broadband, making sure we cover pre-existing conditions, making sure that we do that middle income tax cut that he spent about $9 million talking about on television, making sure that we do things like figuring out a way to get to 2/3 funding of our public schools. I think there's a lot of areas that we can focus on to find that consensus. But if the budget focuses on all of the things that maybe make the people who attend the annual Democratic Party convention cheer, you are going to push Republicans to the other side and say, well, those are things we obviously can't agree with because they are core principles that we do not believe in. So I think what our caucus has said over and over to the governor is that when you form your budget, which is the most instructive document of where you would like to take Wisconsin, don't put the things in the budget that you know are poison pills that we will never be able to accept. Because that will start the entire conversation on that negative note of saying, instead of here's the 9 ideas we know we can focus on and let's compromise and find a way to get there, if it's on the things that you know we're never going to agree with, that will mean the entire budget process begins in that negative tone, and it makes it even harder to find consensus. So my hope is that our sincere offer, we passed pre-existing conditions as AB 1, passed with bipartisan support. Republicans and Democrats voted for it. Only 19 Democrats voted no. So I think that's a good indicator of a bipartisan bill. We have a tax cut that's coming up, not one that I would have drafted the way that I did, but it uses Governor Evers' idea of targeting the tax cuts at the middle class, but it uses the surplus that was generated under the Republicans to say, let's at least make that payment using the revenues that we already have in the bank without having to raise taxes on anybody. And even after we do that, we will still have the same amount of money to spend over the course of the next 2 years that we did under Governor Walker. And under Governor Walker, we funded schools at over $600 million, and we eliminated half the personal property tax while funding it. So I assume the Democrats are not going to want to do more tax cuts than the ones that they've offered. So even if we do the income tax cut, that still means we will have more money to spend on other programs than we have had over the course of the past 15 years. That seems like an awful lot of area that we could find that consensus on without having to pick a fight on whether or not we're going to expand government-run health care or pick a fight of whether or not we're going to raise taxes on anybody. So I think we have a good, positive agenda, but it all depends on if Governor Evers decides to poke people in the eye with a budget that could never pass, or looks and says, let's find those things we can work together on, knowing that there's no poison pills that would make it difficult for us to support.
So there's 3 issues, it seems, that everyone seems to be talking about. And I guess the question is there possible consensus on these 3 issues? The tax cut, different mechanisms to go about it, and we should maybe talk about that. Clean water, everyone's talking about that. It seems like it's on everyone's agenda. And K-12. Mm-hmm. So are those areas where, I mean, would those be the areas where we find consensus right away?
I would think they would be the easier ones, right? I mean, of course, the middle income tax cut, many in my caucus would have preferred to have done it a different way, right? They did not want to have it focused on the standard deduction. They had other ideas. But knowing that Governor Evers wanted it targeted in that way, we said, let's use his framework and figure out a way to actually get it done. So I think the fact that we have put forward one of his campaign promises and we found a way to actually get it done as one of the first bills that we're taking up is as big an olive branch as you could possibly offer. Now, to then begin to say, okay, I've got my own plan, would have been nice if he perhaps sat us down and said, hey, I thank you for doing the opportunity to put together a plan that uses my goals. I have some different ideas to do it. He chose not to do that over the course of the past couple weeks. He came out with his own plan yesterday at the same time our hearing began. He has every right to do that. I have no problem with offering competing ideas. But once again, putting in a poison pill that we're going to increase taxes when we have the largest surplus that we have had in almost 20 years seems to kind of be a thing that you know Republicans are never going to do. Same with K-12. Look, we had the biggest investment in K-12 education in our state's history, $600 million increase, the largest investment you have ever seen in K-12, right? I think we're going to be able to get to 2/3 funding. He put that as a goal. We agreed with that in our letter. So I think there's a lot of things that we could find consensus on as long as, once again, you don't worry about the people who are at the Democrat convention being your only audience, because you've got to figure a way to actually get to the middle.
Those 3 issues, are they Are they the leading candidates, or?
I mean, I'll respond to the speaker only in that, I mean, I think education might take some back and forth because it is the biggest piece of the pie in the state budget. I think we know that it's going to be Governor Evers is going to make that an absolute priority. I think the funding levels might be something that people support, but how we get there, again, may take a couple. Everybody speculates on, well, how does the budget work? Do we get one done? Do we do it piecemeal? I guess, we'll have to see. I think there's going to have to be ongoing dialogue on that, and probably the same for transportation as well. When it comes to tax cuts, these decisions need to be taken just like spending decisions. If you're talking about making a decision that you can pay for, in the first budget, but it blows a hole of $680 million in every future budget to come, that's money that's not going to be available for counties, for schools, for universities, unless you pay for it. And so I think Governor Evers' indication both in the campaign and in what he would like to see is a tax cut that's actually funded and is probably open to ways that we could pay for that. But it's going to have to be responsible and reflect that, not just do something that is, we've seen what happens when we pass tax cuts without coming up for ways to pay for it. And it means we cut the university system by $775 million, we cut schools, we cut your aid, largely to pay for tax cuts that disproportionately went to the wealthiest people in the state of Wisconsin. So I think, those kind of issues are, the devil is going to be in the details and how things move forward.
So that leaves water, right?
I saved it for you.
The water issue, the year of water. And I hope that there is some room there. I met recently with the designee, the DNR secretary, and he said every office I've been talking to, water quality comes up. So if we're talking about, drinking, about wells and drinking water, and we've seen a study of contaminated drinking of wells in southwestern Wisconsin. We've got karst issues up in Kewaunee County and issues there, and so maybe water is our unifier, and it's refreshing to have the DNR secretary use the word science in the first 60 seconds that he sat down and met with me. I was pleased to hear about that and that leadership there, and again, that will help within your land and conservation departments and help with issues there and testing in the public health of clean water. So I hope, I'm intrigued. I want to learn more about what does the year of drinking clean water mean, because there are many different uses of water here in the state. We've got our wetlands and wetland mitigation, the drinking water and other issues. And so I hope that we can, if that's one of the pillars he talked about in his State of the State, and the State of the State is always kind of the appetizer to the budget, where there's much more kind of meat and potatoes and details that we will learn about, and that will be delivered, I think, the end of February 28th, I think, was the date that was agreed upon. So I hope, maybe we'll have a lot of things to talk about water and bipartisanship.
I just think that budget process is going to be critical, because the reality is you're going to get to a point where there's either a negotiation going on while the Finance Committee is reviewing papers that include options that sounds like also may include one of the things that could have been part of the governor's budget when he rolls that out in late February. And if you can build a relationship between the majorities in the legislature and the governor's office, where, keep your veto pen off of this item, and this is what it'll look like, those types of areas that we're talking about here, I mean, that's kind of when you're going to get a good look, I think, or a clear look at what eventually is going to become law. And as part of those processes in the past, it can be very productive, or it can be just a complete waste of time. So I think that's when you're really going to see the rubber hit the road, and we're going to know kind of where we're at on those issues.
Now, one of the issues facing counties, major issue, every corner of the state, the opioid and meth challenge. And it manifests itself in the number of out-of-home placements of our children, the protective care of our children, the foster care costs. Speaker had a task force on foster care last session. The legislature's been, I think, very helpful past couple of sessions in holding hands with the counties as we try to address this challenge. But it keeps getting bigger. So this session, it's one of the major issues for counties. Are we likely to see some continued hand-holding with the legislature and the state try to address this issue?
I hope so, and I have been talking with our own county officials about it. They've been educating me about the numbers and the statistics. And you know, in western Wisconsin, I represent La Crosse, Monroe, Vernon, and Crawford County. But all of you have stories in your counties about the challenges that you are having and the growing caseloads and the expense. And counties are now putting like airfare into a budget item because these kids have to be placed in other states with folks. And so I hope that we can, counties have said this is a heavy lift, but this governor, like, children have been his focus his entire career, right? As an educator and superintendent and state superintendent. So I hope that we see a lot of emphasis on healthy children, healthy families, healthy communities in this budget, that there is a lot of opportunity to, when we talk about investing in our future, it is investing in our kids. And the numbers is, I mean, counties are in crisis right now about this exploding budget that you are faced with, and how, where are the resources that you need. And so I hope that is one that I want to make sure that we can get into the budget.
So I am in Nashville in August. I will become president of NCSL, which is like NACO, but for state legislators. So first time somebody from Wisconsin has become president of NCSL. And the interesting thing is, when I go to the meetings, and I spend a lot of time talking to colleagues from all around the country, they recognize that Wisconsin has been a leader longer than most other states dealing with the opioid crisis. The best thing about that is that we have people who unfortunately have real-world experience and have brought that experience to bear as to how do we work on addressing this problem, because there's no cure. There's not a simple fix, but you can find strategies to deal with it. Chairman Nygren, John Nygren, of course, you know his story about his daughter, and he has really become an advocate and taught a lot of us to be more compassionate and to be more understanding that this is really a crisis that affects every single family in one way or another. I own a factory, as many of you know. I have a young man who's worked for me now for 4 years. He has been 3 times back into treatment because he cannot break his addiction. Finally, he went into a drug court on his 3rd offense, and for 9 months he was clean until 2 weeks ago. And he went back. He's back in the drug court. He's probably going to be in a treatment center for 90 days after he can find a spot, because there's not a single treatment spot in our county right now. So he's going to sit in the county jail till one opens up. So many of us have people that we know, that we care about, that we love, that we deal with this on a regular basis. So there is not a one-size-fits-all. There's not a simple solution. In many ways, I think all of us are equally perplexed as to what the long-term answer is for this problem. Now, I think there are some strategies that we've employed that have been incredibly effective. One is the fact that in the last budget, we provided a couple $1 million for a drug called Vivitrol. Many of you know that that drug, if you take it, it means when you use an opioid, it has no impact on your psyche, right? So you don't get the high from the drug. That is something that I think has shown to be very effective, but it's very expensive. I know many counties use that as part of their drug court. Ours does. So that's something that I'd like to look at and see how can we provide additional funding for strategies that we know work. Drug courts work. We know that placements in a program that uses Vivitrol works. We also know that the foster care system, done right, works well too. And for far too many kids who go into foster care, they are there because they have a mom or a dad or a loved one that uses drugs, and they have had to take that child out for their own safety. And we've also got to have an adult conversation, because the current process attempts to get the child back into the arms of a loving parent as quickly as they can. And of course, that should be the goal. I have no problem with that. But if you have somebody like the employee that works for me who is dealing with their own chemical addiction, where they don't have the use of Vivitrol or something else, and our answer is to try to put that child back as quickly as we can with a potentially drug-addicted parent, you have a story like one of the people who met with me before I did my foster care task force, where they talked about the fact that they took a child in from a mom who was addicted to drugs in the same school year. Now, one school year of a young little girl, she went from the foster parent's house to the mom, back to the foster parent's house to the mom, back to the foster parent's house to the grandmother. 6 moves in one school year. Now, is that good for that child? So I think we also need to have, as part of this discussion, it's not just putting more money into the system, but it's about how the system actually works and what the long-term goal is to actually make that life of the child better and get the person who's addicted to that opioid or that chemical addiction the cure, the treatment, the long-term stability that they need to be a good parent, as opposed to using that child as a ping pong ball. And in the end, all we do is have a child who's got issues that we also have to deal with in the long run.
I mean, I would say this is another issue that has lent itself and should lend itself to bipartisanship. The epidemic has moved faster than our ability to sometimes react, but a lot of the best ideas on how to best manage or equip local law enforcement and first responders to be able to do it have come, that feedback has resulted in legislation that we have passed over the last few years to manage things. The one thing that we do know is that the most effective thing we can do is try to provide access to treatment. And I think one of the reasons why we should take the Medicaid expansion is now that every state in the country is impacted by the opioid epidemic. And we see that states that take the Medicaid expansion are far more successful at treating the opioid epidemic. And so I know there's ideological opposition to the Medicaid expansion for those ideological reasons, but for moral reasons. If you look at what they've done in Ohio under Governor John Kasich, where they even used the waiver process with the Trump administration to be able to provide treatment for an additional 700,000 people, the number one provider for treatment of opioid addiction is Medicaid. Well, if we have the opportunity to expand that, to be creative in our waiver with a goal of providing treatment services to the people who need it most, so they don't have to wait, so they don't have to make a decision, we'll be far more successful in actually providing, those solutions. And again, we have enough evidence. We can look at what's happening in states that have taken it, and Wisconsin is falling behind due to our decision. So instead of having an opposition to it for ideological reasons, let's put the people of Wisconsin first, take the Medicaid expansion money, use it creatively to provide treatment services, to do everything possible that we can for the people of our state.
So, Senator, child welfare, I mean, is this something that we can?
Yeah, I mean, the frustration, I think, and counties we're in, I think there was an ask already that's been made for $30 million in the state budget related to bringing in more social workers. I think the frustration we're starting to feel now is that we know who's on the front line. And the front line are teachers and counselors in the schools. They're seeing this kid every day because these kids are in the wake of the addicted individual. And so far, a lot of the things that we've kind of taken aim at are related to that person that's addicted. But this wake of destruction that they leave kind of behind them is, again, it's in the schools, and then it's in law enforcement, who are interacting not only with these individuals, but as soon as somebody is either hauled in or brought back to court or, relapses, suddenly, what do we do with these kids? So that's kind of the front line, and I'm worried that we're kind of jumping over that in some ways, kind of more focused on the addicted and more focused kind of on, okay, what do we do formally later on once we figure out what the issue is? So if you talk to any high school counselor or an administrator, or if you certainly talk to cops on the street who are dealing with this on a daily basis, we have to kind of review that and see if we can dovetail all of this together, because I think that's where we're at. We're not where we were 4 years, 6 years ago. We are now at the point where this could become generational, and it's going to be kids who have kind of been, like I said, left behind as a result of this, scourge that, the other thing I'll just say real quickly, if you talk to like public defenders, the PDs will tell you Wisconsin has been divided into two categories. Anything north of Highway 29 is meth, and the opiate addiction is still focused southeastern Wisconsin, and then it expands from there. So there's almost like two different fronts that law enforcement, public defenders, and even the prosecutors are seeing kind of develop. And a lot of this comes in from the western states as well. So it's so complex and it's so difficult to wrap our arms around, but I think we have to kind of return focus to what's going on in the schools and then how can we continue to help law enforcement.
This almost seems like tax cut, clean water, K-12, child welfare might be the number one, where we can actually find common ground. And that affects all of us.
It's just draining resources that we don't have, quite honestly.
And we have some counties that have actually taken dollars away from economic development, from tourism, and because we have to pay the bill for placement of the children. Let's move to an area which we haven't been able to find agreement. The giant issue we talk about every year, transportation. Can we get it done? I mean, are there revenue options that the individual caucuses can agree to, or, I mean, are we destined to just continue to have this challenge? Where are we?
Well, I can promise you one thing. The Assembly Republicans and the Senate Republicans are not going to fight about transportation. We are going to find a way to work together. We are not...
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Right. So I want to be very clear in the fact that none of my views have changed. I believe that we need to find long-term answers for transportation. I think it was cute for Governor Evers to bring together 30 people and in 1 week think they were going to find some different answer for transportation and have it be taken seriously. That's cute. I don't know if it did a whole lot, other than the fact that it just reiterated what we already know. So I think if you want to have an actual discussion, you need to bring people in the room who are going to make the decision and try to see if there are answers that we can come up with. I mean, one thing I know Senator Fitzgerald and I agree on is the option to have tolling. We had that in the last budget. It was vetoed by Governor Walker. Okay, I think that was a mistake. We know that we need to continue to look for ways to save resources, that no matter what we do, we have to make sure that we are spending every dollar we take in wisely. So that has to happen. But after all of that, I still believe you need some kind of a revenue option. If it's not tolling, we have to look at other options. But this is not going to be something that is going to divide the Republicans and the legislature. We're going to sit down like adults. We're going to figure it out. And we are going to have an opportunity for us to have a proposal after we see what Governor Evers offers.
Democrats?
The 3 terms now that I've been the leader, I'm in my 3rd term, so I guess the 2 exit interviews at the end of the session have always been, what's your biggest regret, Senator Schilling? And I always say that we cannot figure out a long-term sustainable funding mechanism. And the problem is just getting worse. I mean, I've driven through Senator Fitzgerald's district and I stop and I take pictures of the potholes and I text him. And I'm like, this isn't your district. Let's figure this out. I did. Let's figure this out. You know, the roads are crocodiling. Our school districts are sending us videos of the roads that the buses are on. I've been on a bus and the repair to the bus is, you know, that is needed because of the road conditions. So, you know, we've always said everything should be on the table. I think we can talk about this without being condescending about task forces that have come forward, and we have had blue ribbon commissions, and we've had task forces that have made recommendations, and we just need to get that binder off the shelf. We need to dust it off and look at what some of those recommendations are. And like I said, people are talking about we do have a revenue problem. We need to figure out, in this last budget, the budget was $76 billion. $76 billion. And we still didn't have an answer to transportation. So I think, and I was impressed with the varied groups that were around on this task force, that were around the table that I saw in La Crosse. And we all know what we need to do. We need to figure out what is that path. I mean, if it's a mixture of things, it's not going to be one silver bullet that we're going to do. It's going to be probably a cafeteria mixture of things that we need to do. But I hope that we can be better partners with our towns and counties and cities, and as a state put forward, you know, back in the day it was like a pride. We had nicknames of Concrete Cleat Vanderparen, who was like proud of like infrastructure and the road projects that were going on and the investments that were happening in our communities. So we need to get back to that, because it's not getting better, it's getting worse.
Well, this is kind of big news today, though.
What Senator Schilling didn't tell you is what I text back to him. It's never nice.
This is kind of big news that, I mean, the Republican caucuses are going to be on the same page.
Well, I don't
What page is that?
Well, I was going to say, I don't think the equation hasn't changed. I mean, it's still the same options. It's just how do you get that to that mix. I have become a bigger believer in the idea that I don't know how not only Wisconsin but any state fixes the bigger infrastructure issue without some type of open road tolling. And it's not just me. Now you're starting to hear it at the federal level, where, just last night in the State of the Union, the president talked about it again, because now you're talking about generating billions of dollars instead of millions of dollars. So even if you did, obviously, a 10-cent gas tax increase, you'd have $330 million more dollars to work with. Well, that's not going to get it done. We've seen states like Iowa that have done that as of late, and they're not, you can't say they're not in a better position, but it didn't solve the problem that they have, and that won't solve our problem either. So between open road tolling, certainly, gas tax, if you're looking at vehicle registration, or if you're looking at, title fee, all of those things, like Senator Schilling said, I think it's going to be some type of mix. But I also will say, I've got some senators in my caucus that are still focused on DOT, the agency itself, whether or not there's both federal dollars and state dollars that are being wasted. And, we have to kind of bring that discussion together as well at the same time you're talking about, where are we headed? So it's complex. I don't think the issue has changed much. I don't think it will under Governor Evers. I just think whatever he offers is not necessarily going to be a different list of items than what we considered for the last budget itself. So.
And I'll just say this, like a lot of issues, perhaps like immigration, we don't solve this issue, we manage this issue. And I think when we're talking about taking action, it's not making anything worse. It's about taking steps towards having a more sustainable plan that recognizes the importance of infrastructure and having funding for that without borrowing and doing other things. There are people who still hold true to the idea. Look, if I had to choose, that's the problem with polls. Do you support a gas tax, yes or no? Well, no, because it's not tied to any decisions. The trade-offs with that, gravel roads, impact on the economy, more traffic, more construction, then you might start understanding these things. State government, besides education, one of the biggest things that we can do if our number one priority is economic development is invest in good infrastructure. Some of the spending decisions, we have had to cut spending, and you know what it's been, because I've met with my county highway commissioner. It is a reconstruction turns into a resurfacing. They buy 5 years instead of fixing it for 25 years, and it costs money, and then it just kicks it down the line. And that's how we've seen DOT over the last few years manage their more limited budget, is by scaling back on scope, which just drives up the cost later. We could start with a gas tax, but we'll still be in 2 years facing a challenge. We still have more fuel-efficient cars. We have more electric vehicles. We're going to have to continue to look at diversifying options. It's always hard when they tell me it's going to be like the Jetsons and we're going to have automated cars and maybe fewer drivers if older people aren't driving and younger people aren't driving. These are all things that the future legislatures are going to need to consider that involves more management and ongoing discussions than a solution. A gas tax with an indexing would certainly stop the bleeding, but it's not we're still going to face challenges. There's simply more to do than there are resources.
Well, I will say we can all say the issue has not changed. What has changed is the leadership. And we don't have a governor who has threatened to use his veto pen on anything that comes forward. And talking about, in these side conversations offline, colleagues are like, yep, I know we have to do something. But back in the day when we had a president or a governor who was running for president, nobody wanted to go out on that tree branch that felt like the governor would saw off because he was going to veto. You went out on the tree branch?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. I got the branch cut off.
Yeah.
It did.
I read about this.
Yeah.
I did that.
So what has changed is the East Wing. So we now have a governor who has not drawn a line in the sand, meaning if this, then that. And so to try to have these conversations about a mix of a lot of things that are out there, I think that's a renewed conversation.
Well, I guess one thing I hope we can all agree on is we have who is likely or probably the smartest transportation guy in the state now at the head of DOT. Craig Thompson is about as good as it gets. And secondly, and the speaker and I have known each other a long time. And this is the first time ever I was part of the 30-member Governor Evers' group. First time he's ever called me cute. So, so on the budget, are we going to start with the governor's budget? Are we going to start from scratch? Somewhere in between? How is this process going to work?
It all goes back to what the governor chooses to put in it, in my opinion. If he puts in a massive tax increase and builds all kinds of new spending off of new taxes, remembering Republicans have principles we are never going to violate, we are not going to raise income or sales taxes, period. It's never going to happen. So if you build a county budget, if your executive comes to you with a 20% property tax increase as a hypothetical, and you know you're not going to do that, doesn't that mean you have to go back and look at everything? Because you have to look at every single spending item to say, well, how do I make this work with the parameters that we actually have? So if Governor Evers chooses to kind of stick it in the eye to the legislature by having massive tax increases, a big expansion of Medicaid, which we are also not going to do, that means the entire budget is built on a house of sand and it's totally unsustainable. So he has to make the first move. I'm not going to say we're going to not use his budget. If he takes and says, wow, we have the most new revenue we have had in over 20 years, we're going to sit down and allocate that new revenue, and then we'll sit down with the leaders and the legislature and negotiate on what the best use of this $2.5 billion of new money is, well, then we probably could use an awful lot of things that he has in his budget. But if he says $2.5 billion of new revenue isn't enough, I need $4 or $5 billion, I don't know what his number is going to be. Well, then the entire budget falls apart, and we obviously have to go back to the base because we have to look at every single decision that he has made to use new tax dollars, which aren't going to be there, to increase kind of phantom spending. So the first move is his, in my opinion. And I have said to him when I met with him, every time we have met, I have said, if you build your budget on false revenue numbers that are never going to be there because you know who Republicans are, you cannot be surprised that we then have to go back to the base and start at everything at zero and build our way up. So my hope is, and I'm saying it again now, it is a simple equation. Take the things that you know that are never going to happen and put them off the table. Start negotiating on the things that you know are possible. That's what my hope is that he chooses to do between now and February 28th.
I feel like we are in the midst of 5 stages of grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You know, first you're angry, then you're in denial, and then you get to depression and bargaining and finally acceptance. And the legislature is somewhere in those stages of grief. And I can't emphasize enough that the majority party does not control everything anymore. They don't control everything. And to try to figure out, to have these direct, firm lines in the sand from the get-go, that we need to figure out how we have this healthy push and pull and give and take of compromise and negotiating and horse trading. And that's what happens. And I mean, we saw in the last budget when one party controlled everything, and I don't think they delivered until September or October. I mean, like, there was dysfunction with the right hand and the far right hand. So to try to figure out what the right hand and the left hand are going to do this year and find some common denominators, like the governor was elected, the Democratic governor was elected on the issues that he ran on. And the Republican legislature will say, well, we were elected on the issues that we ran on. And so we're at juggernauts, like, right, we're headbutting right from the get-go. So I hope that, like, the political sniping doesn't help. Just the tone doesn't help. Trying to bring about civility. I came into the Senate in a tough time in 2011, and we have had to work. Civility is hard. And I have challenged my colleagues to remain at the table through the messiness, because governing is messy. It always has been. And the day before inauguration, I was fortunate to be in Chicago to see Hamilton with my sisters, and it reiterated that governing has always been messy, and that we have to stay at the table. Now, we may have these relationships of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, where we've got, like, these strange alliances that happen and they come and go. But I hope that we can really have sincere dialogue with parties and leaders and the governor's administration on where we can be problem solvers. Because people back home sometimes don't know if I have a D or an R behind my name. They don't know if I'm in the majority or the minority. They're like, Jen, we elect you to solve problems. We expect you to stay in the room and to be grown-ups, and work through the difficult things and to have options, and there has to be give and take. And so, I just saw a former Republican assembly member who was up in La Crosse for a concert his daughter was in and said, it's probably a good thing. We're in the middle, moderation. Both sides will probably be unhappy, but we'll get stuff done. So I hope we can get to that point where maybe we're all upset about stuff, but we're getting stuff done, because it means we've had to do some push and pull and compromise on things.
Any thoughts on the budget, how we're going to proceed?
All four of us have been on the Finance Committee. It's the beauty of that process that I think ultimately moves us forward. We always build a budget that the legislature kind of embraces. And it's because when you look at the papers, there'll be the governor's option of what he put in his budget. You'll then have two options that are typically generated by the nonpartisan fiscal bureau. And then you'll probably have something that is probably put in place by the party that's in control. But that doesn't mean that 80% of the budget couldn't be something that Governor Evers may have originally authored. And I think that's probably where we will end up. So this idea like we're going to take the governor's budget and throw it out and start over, it doesn't matter if it was Tommy Thompson or Scott Walker or Jim Doyle. It didn't matter. That Finance Committee sits in that room, goes over these papers, and goes, it's tedious too sometimes, but goes through each and every area of the state budget and makes a specific decision, and then they vote on it. And that puts that budget in a place that I think is typically pretty good for the state. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to get a bipartisan vote. You won't. But it does mean that you're going to have to negotiate and listen to Tony Evers along the way, because he's got this very powerful veto pen. So, it'll be interesting to know who will be the person that will negotiate that for the governor. We don't really know. I don't know if it's Joel Brennan at DOA or if it's going to be somebody that's going to be sitting in the room. We don't know who that person's going to be right now. But like I said earlier, that dance that happens between the legislature and the executive branch is so important, because that's what ultimately will get the state budget done.
And I'll just say, a budget is about priorities, and Governor Evers ran on certain priorities, and I fully expect him to put those priorities in his budget, because that's what he ran on, and that's the most important thing that an executive does every 2 years. And I fully expect the Finance Committee to remove some of those things for the reasons they said, but there is going to be that back and forth, and I think Senator Fitzgerald's right that some of the things that get taken out may end up back in the back and forth, but I guarantee you at the end of the day, there will be Republicans who vote for something that they don't love, and Governor Evers probably will have to sign something that falls short of what he started out with if we're going to have a budget at the end.
All four of you are accomplished, recognized leaders in your profession, politics, government, administration. But you're also real people, and I've met with all of you inside and outside the Capitol. I recently had the opportunity to interview Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds and the challenger to Kim Reynolds, Fred Hubbell, on a stage like this. And we went through a lightning round of just a couple of questions to get some personal perspective on life. So I'd like to just, these are quick questions. I'd just like to give us a quick answer. So, and they're easy. There's nothing to be afraid of. No, you know, there's nothing to be nervous about. Give us, doesn't have to be your favorite because you can't play favorites, but give us one supper club or restaurant that you gotta go to it.
Ishinala, my favorite,
Okay.
my happy spot.
All right.
I love Ishinala, my favorite.
Not in your district.
I know. It's in Wisconsin. No, I love it. Anything
right.
we're near, a supper club on water is beautiful. Brandy old fashioned in my hand. Wonderful.
Well, I have a tragic story. My best supper club just closed a month ago. The Blue Inn on Highway 60.
Thanks, Governor Walker.
Did they sell or what happened?
I don't know what happened.
Oh, okay.
Tony Evers got elected.
Okay, Blue Inn, all right. Representatives?
I mean, it's sturgeon spearing season in on Lake Winnebago area, so you got to stop by Wentz on the lake there for a great perch and to check out the way station with the
Okay.
sturgeon out there. It's amazing. If you haven't ever been before, it is We have people that come from all over the world. It's an incredibly unique thing.
Okay.
Anybody from southeastern Wisconsin knows the Hobnob in Kenosha
Okay.
is fantastic. So if you haven't been there, make sure you take some time.
Okay. All right, give us two things. I know you're busy people, but sometimes you have to go to the grocery store. Two things we're never, ever going to find in your grocery cart.
Okay?
Glazers from Quick Trip, and did you say the things you won't find?
Will not find in your not find in your grocery cart.
I got it. Mayonnaise.
Mayonnaise? No mayonnaise for you. And what else?
You talking?
get two.
I got
You
my
get two.
Oh, two.
Two.
Any white condiment.
Okay. All right.
Grosses me out.
Mushrooms. I'm not a fan of mushrooms. I've tried as an adult. Like, it's awkward when you're at a dinner and you have to slide those mushrooms off your plate. You're not eating those. You pick around them. And veal.
Mushrooms and veal. Okay.
They go well together.
You had an extra 20 cents.
Yeah. I'm cottage cheese and olives. That's it.
No cottage cheese, no
Never,
olives.
never.
No kind of olives.
Nope. I'd rather eat that magazine. Yep, nope.
It's a county's magazine for those who can't see. Yes, Senator.
Probably any Anheuser-Busch product.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we don't drink Bud Light in my house at all.
Okay.
And the other thing, I'm not a big liver and onions guy, but
Yeah, that's
my
all right.
wife still makes it once in a while.
Okay. So when we come to visit your offices, no cottage cheese or olives, no liver, onions, or Bud Light,
That's right.
no
Mushrooms or
Veal.
veal,
That's a dish.
and nothing, no white condiments of any sort.
That's right.
That's it.
That's true. I've seen him. Like, that's very true.
Got it.
So many good sandwiches have been ruined by being pre-made.
No Plaza Burger for you, Representative.
No
That's-
Plaza
You just
Burger.
got to get it on the order on the
Just a
early
plain.
side.
I did have one of my colleagues at one point go through a drive-through fast food place, and she ordered a hamburger with nothing on it. When she opened it up, it was just the bun. That was Michelle Thompson.
Oh, that's funny.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Gordon Hintz, Jennifer Schilling, Scott Fitzgerald, Speaker Robin Voss, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Can't believe my mail.
Thank you. All right. Next up, maybe I need some glass clinking. Could that help? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue with our legal update. I'd ask you to please join me in welcoming to the stage Attorney Andy Phillips. Andy?
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me on this mic? Is that okay? Do I have a clicker? Here it is. You know, that's what you did to me at conference, too. I was looking all over for the clicker. It was right in front of me. All right. So, we're going to talk briefly legal update. Yesterday, got all sorts of really good questions, and I talked a ton during the Ask the Attorney portion. I want to thank everybody for waiting until 5:30 to ask me all of your questions. That was awesome. Thank you. So Mark and the group asked that I actually talk about a couple of issues of importance to Wisconsin County government this morning. And we're going to start off with this whole issue of the county sales tax. If you have questions about this during my presentation, feel free to ask